Hi, folks who are joining. We're just waiting for people to hop on before we officially start. My name is Maria. While we wait, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. And I'm just making sure the chat box is working, and it is, so that's awesome. And feel free to introduce yourself with your name, your organization, where you're located, and if you'd like to share why you attended or were interested in attending this event, that would be great as well. Oh, it's so nice to see people joining, some who I know. Thanks for joining. Hi, everybody. Again, if you've just joined, we'll get started in another minute. We're just waiting to see if a few more people trickle in, then we'll officially start. Oh, thanks for the folks who are joining from Kenya, 11 p.m. Definitely late, so appreciate you joining. All right, I think I'll officially get started, but we might have more people trickle in. So welcome again, everyone. My name is Maria Tahir. I am the co-founder of Sahiyo and the U.S. Executive Director. And welcome to our Voices to End FGM, or female genital mutilation / cutting digital storytelling screening. We're so excited to have you join. And while we wait, and you may have heard me already say this, but feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box if you haven't already. And we wanted to just launch a quick Zoom poll at the beginning, and then I'll jump into some housekeeping and then get us started with what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the day. So if everybody who is on can just a couple of quick questions to help us engage and understand who we have on the call and your knowledge level, that would be wonderful. So I'll give you all a minute to fill out that poll. All right, so as you're finishing up that poll, maybe we could just go to the DOJ slide really quickly. So just wanted to let you all know that this project is being funded by the Department of Justice Office of Victims of Crime. And we're just sharing a disclaimer that the views and opinions shared during this presentation do not necessarily reflect the Department of Justice. All right, if we can go to the next slide. Great, so just another couple of housekeeping things. We are recording this event and we'll be sending the slides out after the event to everyone who has registered for this screening. So if you are interested in watching again, or if you have other coworkers, definitely know that you'll get the slides, you'll get the recording. And we do have live captioning available. So if you would like to see a live caption, please click the button at the bottom of your screens that should say live transcript, or might have a C on it too. And again, my name is Maria, but I'm also joined by my colleagues, Amy Hill from StoryCenter and Orchid Puse from Asian Women's Shelter. So Orchid and Amy, would you two like to quickly just say hello?
Sure, I'll start. I'm Orchid. I am Executive Director at Asian Women's Shelter in San Francisco, and I'm so happy that you all are logged in here and we get to spend this time together, learning from and honoring these stories. Amy?
So happy to be here with everyone. I work with StoryCenter. I direct our Silent Speaks program, which focuses primarily on women's health and human rights issues globally. And I'm excited to be able to premiere these stories.
Great. Thanks, Orchid and Amy. I'm also happy to share that we have two of our storytellers who took part in our recent Voices Digital Storytelling Workshop, which we hosted in October and November of 22, so just this past year. And we'll be seeing both of their videos as well, and you'll get the chance to hear from both of them, reflect on their experience and why they share their story. And hopefully we'll have time for Q&A. So if you have any questions, you'll be able to ask them. And throughout the conversation today, feel free to ask questions in the chat box. We do have a Q&A section as well. So if you want to pop in your questions there, we'll do our best to try to get to them or to respond. All right, so the agenda for today is we are going to be talking a little bit about the Voices project overall and what it entails. And then we'll show the Voices videos. We also will talk about the storytelling method and what the digital storytelling process looks like and what our workshops look like as well. And then we'll jump to a panel discussion that'll be moderated by Orchid, and our panelists, Kate and Farrah, will be joining, who were participants in our last workshop. So that's just a quick overview of what we'll be doing. So if we could just go to that. Great. So to provide some context on today's event, Sahiyo has been working to end female genital cutting in Asian and other communities around the world since 2015. And then, as Amy had mentioned, StoryCenter is an organization that specializes in supporting individuals and organizations in using storytelling and participatory media for reflection, education, and social change. Asian Women's Shelter, as Orchid was talking about, is also a culturally specific organization with the mission to eliminate domestic violence, trafficking, and other forms of violence by promoting the social, economic, and political self-determination of all survivors of violence and oppression. And all three of our organizations very much believe that storytelling can play a powerful role in raising awareness. The Voices to End FGMC project supports those impacted by this particular issue to tell their own stories through their own perspectives in their own words. By bringing folks together to share their stories, Voices to End FGMC has taken an essential step forward in breaking the silence on the global nature of FGMC. So the overall goal of this project is really to build a group, a cohort of survivors and or advocates who are willing to speak out against FGMC as a way of shifting social norms. And we do very much believe and view FGMC as a social norm within communities. It's a harmful social norm, but it is something that has found many different justifications over the centuries for why it continues. So really, storytelling is a way of shifting those social norms and supporting communities to advocate for an end to the harmful practice. In 2018, Sahiyo and StoryCenter launched an inaugural digital storytelling workshop that brought survivors of FGMC living in the United States together to surface their personal experiences of FGMC. Since that time, we have hosted 7 workshops, including 4 virtual workshops, and we now have a collection of over 70 stories. And overall, these stories have helped elevate conversations of FGMC in the US and elsewhere more globally, and they've been shared widely through online distribution, screening events, and the media. In 2021, Sahiyo and StoryCenter joined with Asian Women's Shelter to expand our project and to use the videos as teaching tools to support an organization in learning more about FGMC and thinking through how to incorporate services to FGMC survivors in an existing culturally specific anti-gender-based violence organization. The hope was that by increasing knowledge of FGC within the organization, we could increase overall capacity to support survivors of FGMC in the US. So for over a year, we've been working with Asian Women's Shelter, training their staff and their crisis line counselors on how to support survivors. And in August of this past year, Asian Women's Shelter opened their existing 24-hour support line up to be able to now include supporting FGC survivors. So I'll let Orchid talk more about that if she would like during the Q&A or anything there else you want to bring up. But it's been a great partnership, and it's something that we're hoping to continue to expand. All right, so if we could just go to the next slide. So I wanted to also share that we will be hosting our 8th workshop in August 2023. And we're going to be doing this in a hybrid manner, which is the first time we'll be trying out this format. We have in the past done in person completely or virtual. And we're really excited about this format and seeing what it'll look like. The online workshop dates, so the first portion will be 2 Tuesdays for a couple of hours, and they'll be August 15th and August 22nd. And then it'll be in person in Oakland, California on August 26th and August 27th. So if you are interested in taking part in this workshop, and you will be learning more about it, particularly if this is your first time really understanding or coming to watch these videos, it's open to individuals living in the US. We have had global workshops, but unfortunately this one is specific to the US. And it's open to anyone who has experiences with FGMC, either as a survivor or family members, friends, advocates, and others living in the US who would like to share a story about the impacts of FGMC in their lives. We've included the application link here, and maybe we can also share it in the chat box. And the deadline to apply is June 1st. And one other thing I'll mention is that we do have travel scholarships available. But again, this is something that is open to those living in the US at this time. And can we just go to the next slide? The other thing I wanted to share is that based on feedback from past participants and just feedback from others who have viewed our Voices story, there was a demand to create a centralized site where you could get the stories, you could learn more about the project, you could expand in hearing about the participants, the storytellers themselves and their experiences, and find resources. So we were able to create a website, which was launched about a year ago, I believe, at this point in time. It's a wonderful site for learning more about this project, but it has all the videos on it. It has some resources on it, and the storytellers often are able to share their experiences on the workshop and sometimes their advocacy stories and experiences, how they've utilized the videos, so you can really learn more in depth what this project entails. So with that, we are going, maybe we could put that link in the chat box too. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Amy to take us through the next portion of this workshop.
Thanks, Maria. So we'd like to talk a little bit about the workshop approach that we use for creating the digital stories. But just to give context to that, we're going to begin by showing our first story. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to watch our first story. All right, hopefully everyone can see this. And this is Farrah's story. We'll hear from her during our panel discussion.
I remember the words of my friends. Go after him. Why didn't you give that guy your number? He likes you. So, what happened after your movie date? Nothing? College. Everyone says it's the best time of your life. The frustration in their voices is not lost on me. My roommates and peers work hard and play hard. Party, date, have sex. At that time, I could only manage the work part. I assume they boil it down to stereotypes about my culture, which I hate. But it's really because the all-American girl I've worked so hard to be is actually in the company of the faraway women I read about in my sociology textbooks, women who've been cut. I confirmed the truth about my cutting during a routine clinical exam at school. The nurse practitioner said, "I'm sorry, but it seems to have all been removed." I had asked her to look down there after sharing my concerns about what happened to me. Hot, silent tears came quickly, then unleashed. I remembered being a 7-year-old girl lying on my back in a clinic, just like that one. The tears were different then. The fear, then being held down, and finally the stabbing pain that pierced through my insides still haunt me. But I moved on, working hard to distance myself from a community that had other plans for me. When I share this memory with close friends, I'm met with horror and shock, which feels like a confirmation of my otherness and of what I see at the time as the hopelessness of my situation. No one will want me. I am incomplete. I carry the shame like a sword and shield for decades, on guard and ready to defend myself at a moment's notice, trying to preserve what's left. I love the life I've since created, but sometimes I still think about what else I might be doing, how I might be different if I hadn't been cut. I still struggle with a sense of inadequacy. I was taught to hate my body, to question good things that were happening to me, to accept the worst and be okay with it. But now I'm teaching my daughter something entirely different.
So please feel free to share your initial reaction, emotional response to that piece in the chat box, just so that people can express a response to that piece. And now I think we can bring the slides back up before we come to the rest of the stories, because we wanted to talk a little bit about our methodology for creating the stories. So I'm not sure who was going to bring up the slides. There we go. Great. All right. So Maria talked a little bit about our project, and we wanted to just give some context for the focus on storytelling. Clearly, probably everyone on the webinar would agree that this idea of storytelling has become kind of a big buzzword in marketing circles, and to some extent in the nonprofit sector, NGO sector as well. And certainly people everywhere tell stories for all kinds of different reasons. And for our project, for Voices to End FGMC, we really believe that storytelling can have a continuum of important impacts on individuals, on communities, and on institutions in terms of policy level. So for storytellers as individuals, there's the piece about enhancing well-being, building connections and solidarity. building relationships. And then at the community level, of course, storytelling can transmit crucial information in a really heartfelt way and mobilize people on a particular issue. And at the policy level, stories can influence decision-making and laws. And so just to go over a little bit more detail about each of those, at the individual and community level, there is research that that shows that telling and listening to real people's real stories can increase self-esteem and well-being, particularly people's sense of self-efficacy or belief that they have agency in life and can handle life's challenges. And then next, personal stories can bring across important factual information together with a perspective that does draw on emotion, and they can prompt reflection on the part of viewers, as I think we're seeing in the chat box right now, who are then able to connect stories to their own life situations. And this kind of connection is really a starting point for empathy, which can spur action. And then again, at the community level, story sharing and listening for us are also key tools of popular education. So my kind of entry point into digital storytelling work was through the work of Brazilian educator Paulo Freire, who really believed that the development of critical consciousness, which he saw as a precursor to action for social change, must begin with one's close examination of one's own experience and its location within an unjust social and political and cultural environment. And our digital storytelling workshops really do this by supporting people in kind of connecting the dots between their lives and the larger factors and structures in terms of social, cultural, and so on, in which their lives are unfolding. And so the approach really does become a springboard towards involvement in change efforts. And then finally, those of you, I'm sure there are folks on the webinar who've been involved in policy advocacy. People know that personal stories can be really useful tools for supporting policy education and enforcement and policy advocacy. So that's rationale. If we could go to the next slide, just a very quick overview of our workshop process. So the Voices workshops are adapted from a core digital storytelling workshop curriculum developed many years ago now by StoryCenter. And we guide people through a hands-on process of identifying what story they want to tell, crafting and audio recording it as a little audio piece, gathering and creating images and video clips to use to illustrate the story, and then learning to use a simple cloud-based editing app called WeVideo to edit all these materials into a short video. So in terms of the breakdown of the workshop, it always, whether we're working in an online workshop that's spread over a number of weeks, such as the workshop in which the stories we're watching today were created, or whether we're working at a kind of blended learning online and in-person session where people come together in person, the workshop follows the same steps. And so the initial focus of our workshop is really supporting storytellers in identifying what story it is they want to share. And we do this by showing examples of stories that have been made in previous workshops and going over some of our curricular methods, including something that we have called 7 Steps of Digital Storytelling. And then comes what I think really is the heart of the workshop, which is the story circle. And this is where people verbally take turns sharing their stories and discussing and receiving feedback and validation and support from their fellow participants and from the facilitators. Then the next step of the workshop involves developing and audio recording short scripts. So based on the feedback that people receive in the story circle and supported through one-on-one feedback and conversation with facilitators, storytellers draft and refine their stories to focus really in on what they feel is most meaningful and what they feel safe and comfortable sharing. And just to be clear, for recordings in digital storytelling, we don't typically use video cameras because people tend to sometimes get nervous when they're being filmed. So instead, if it's a virtual workshop, we instruct people very carefully on how to do a good recording using a mobile phone. And if it's in person, we use professional recording equipment. Then the focus after that is the seeing your story. The focus is on images and editing. So we support storytellers in kind of looking through images they may have brought, or identifying photos and video clips that they may have or that they can take to gather together images. And then we guide them through a simple hands-on video editing tutorial that shows how to create a rough draft of the story as a simple short video. And then finally, we always end the workshop with a screening of all of the stories, kind of like we're doing today, except they would just be in draft form. And this is always such a wonderful way to bring some closure to what unfolded over the course of the workshop, beginning with the story circle and then ending with the completed videos. And the last thing I'll say before we continue on with watching the beautiful stories is that all of our Voices work is really rooted in a solid set of ethical guidelines that StoryCenter uses, which very much stress the protection and enhancement of storyteller well-being through a really careful living consent process and ongoing engagement with our storytellers. So it's not sort of like a one-off, oh, let's just extract your story. It's very much a participatory and engaged process. So that's the workshop. And so now I think we can stop sharing the slides, and I'm going to continue on with the stories. And so just as we did, I think, with our internal screening, what we'll do is we're going to show the 6 remaining stories back to back, but we will have about maybe a 15 to 20 second pause between each one, so that people can, just as they did with the beautiful comments for Farrah, if you could just respond kind of from your heart to the stories, that would be great, so that we can have just kind of that quiet acknowledgement of the stories. So I'm going to start with Kate's story next, and let's watch that one together.
All of your friends can use one. Why can't you? Broken is the word that rings in my head when my mother says those words. I'm 12, and she's mad at me for not being able to put in a tampon. I keep telling her, it hurts. As the years go by, brokenness becomes cemented in my psyche. Even after I learn what I'm experiencing has a name: primary vaginismus. I'm sure I'm alone in my suffering. I'm sure no one will ever be able to love me if I can't have sex. The first time I ever hear someone say the word vaginismus out loud is while moderating a webinar on the sexual impacts of female genital cutting, or FGC. Growing up, I had heard of FGC, but it wasn't until I went to university that I was asked to critically engage with the issue. Working in the field of FGC prevention, I'm learning a lot about how people worldwide are empowering their communities to abandon the practice and to surface taboo topics around sex and shame. I'm also learning so much more about myself. This webinar was the first time I hear women speaking openly about their experiences around pain and sex. Finally, I feel like someone understands what it's like to struggle with sex and the weight of the shame, isolation, and anger that comes with that. While FGC is not my experience, what the speakers say that day on the panel reverberates at the core of the shame and pain I feel related to my vaginismus. When the webinar ends, my computer screen fades to black. The weight of the speaker's words finally settles in, and relief washes over me. I'm not broken. I'm not alone. Tears gently splash onto my keyboard. In the soft glow of the screen, I see my own face reflected back at me, as if I am seeing myself for the first time.
So again, please feel free to note your reactions and comments in the chat box. All right, now we're going to move on to Yusra's story. Here we go.
I was 18, and I was having my first pap smear. A pap smear is never really something to look forward to, but this was stepping over my boundaries and resurfacing everything I had worked so hard to forget. Hesitant at first, I eased into the vulnerable state, uncomfortable for anyone to be in. Trusting the stranger to examine my deepest, most private parts, reminders of my painful childhood. As she felt around the outside of my vagina, she said, "What is this?" At first, she naively stroked my lesion, but then her touch became invasive. It did not feel like medicine anymore. Her touch paired with the curious tone of her voice that expressed both concern and ignorance sent shivers down my spine. I thought, she now knows. I wondered, will these feelings resurface every time I undress before a doctor? Every time I decide to tell someone I'm getting close to about what happened to me? Every time I share my body with a lover? I have not had a pap smear since. I should not have to face these questions. No woman should.
All right. Thank you to Yusra. Please feel free to share your reactions to that beautiful piece. We know that watching these stories can be an intense experience, and we just encourage you all to take care of yourselves in the ways that you know how to do as we're watching these really powerful videos. Thank you for the comments. So next we have Ume's story, and I'm going to bring that up now.
Who are you, really? I have a confession to make. I'm a thief. I may even be a murderer. My body does not belong to me, this stolen shell subjected to the great misfortune of a consciousness it was not meant to have. An imposter. One moment you are a whole person, and then you close your eyes and are transported into another, a near perfect copy, with probably no idea what has become of your original self, one who has no idea you are no longer you. One moment you are 5 years old, and a gloved hand is wiping away your tears while you lay, cold and afraid, on a metal gurney bed in a metal room with a metal needle pouring unwanted sleep into your tiny veins. You blink. A moment passes, and you teleport into a recovery room warmed by the sun, flanked by your grandmothers. You are a near-perfect copy of the 5-year-old in that metal room, on that metal gurney bed, the one who has no idea she is no longer you, the one you left behind. I hate her, love her, envy her. In another universe, abandoned decades worth of light years back, is a girl who is still a girl whose parents must make an impossible choice. Turn away from all they have ever known and preserve the wholeness of a girl who is still a girl, traverse into the unknown dark of loneliness with a whole daughter by their side, or kill her and pretend the imposter they build is the proper one. Destroy the memory of the original, dead on the metal gurney bed, and never let her know of the timeline where she is still she, still a choice. It will not be the last time I die, not the last time I will lay on a cold metal table and count to black, only to wake up a copy of the version before me, a little less than I was when I went to sleep. But it will be the only time someone else chooses to kill me.
All right, again, please share your reactions, comments to Ume's incredible poetry and very vivid images. Take a moment. Got 3 more stories. So feel free to stretch your arms, take a breath, and let's go on to Nazneen's story. I'm glad we're pausing because it takes a minute to bring the stories up and down anyway. All right, here we go.
In 2003, I was chatting with a friend, and he mentioned that his girlfriend could not reach orgasm because she'd been snipped. He expected me to understand, but I was puzzled. This was my introduction to the practice of khatna, or female genital cutting, FGC, in my community. I had so many questions that needed answering. I asked my parents. They understand that there is no logic behind it, and it's completely unnecessary. They said they do not believe in this custom and had protected my sister and me from this practice. We are forever grateful to them. I forgot all about FGC till 2017, when a medical doctor was arrested for cutting young girls in Michigan. Suddenly it became a topic of open discussion within my circle of family and friends. I learned that several of them had undergone FGC and never talked about it. Several told me they continue to experience pain, shame, and will never forget what happened to them. Today, as a physical therapist, I specialize in education and rehabilitation of the pelvic area. I work with women who are experiencing difficulties with intercourse, urination, and bowel function, and also pregnancy-related conditions. Those conversations about FGC made me realize the relevance of my work for those who have been cut. These are issues women who have undergone FGC may also experience throughout their lives. I started telling the women in my circle that there are resources available. There are healthcare providers like me who are here to help alleviate their pain, be it physical, emotional, or mental. We need to be open and honest with our bodies in a way that is too often discouraged for women in general, and especially for women who've been cut. The secrets surrounding female genital cutting need to end, as does the practice.
Right. Powerful words of support. Feel free to continue the dialogue and the sharing in the chat box. And we will bring up our next story.
It's not easy when it's your story. I was only 8 years old when it happened. I did not realize this moment had stuck with me until I started trying to write it down. It is early in the morning before sunrise. I see large, dark shadows coming into the room. I see 4 large women. They surround me and hold me down on the floor. I see my mom standing in the corner. I'm calling for her, but she is not answering. I call yet again, Hoyo, Hoyo, and she just looks at me. Her face is blank and cold. She ignores my calls. Then I see a 5th woman approaching me. She sits down on the ground in front of my feet. As the 4 other women hold me down, the 5th woman opens my legs and cuts me with a razor. I feel it all. There is no anesthesia or sanitation. I scream, and then one of the women puts something in my mouth to stop me. I am so scared that I thought I will die. I cannot see through my tears. I cannot breathe. The 5th woman stitches me. I feel every cut and poke. It is as if my soul left from my body, and I am staring at the wall, staring at the blades of the fan spinning around and around. They tie a rope around my thighs and knees so that I cannot take big steps and open my legs wide while I'm healing. Before that day, I trusted my mother. Afterward, I felt betrayed. I put up a wall. To this day, I think of my mother's cold face and I cry. This is the first time I have spoken of it, and I am 50-year-old. It's an awful feeling to live with. The feeling that if your closest, safest person can betray you, everyone else will too. It's not fair for any child to go through this.
All right. Powerful final words. We have one more story. Yes, it is heartbreaking. We have one more story, and then we'll turn to some discussion so people will have a chance to ask questions and so on. And let's bring up our final story.
I'm at the radiologist, legs spread apart, everything feels cold, metallic, and sharp. The technician gives me the look. I have seen this familiar look for 20 years, a mix of pity, shock, a speechless awkwardness, curiosity. Nurses passing by also do a double take at the screen, surprised at the mess that is my barren body. I was 35 years old, lying on a hospital bed in the emergency room. I was shivering and the nurse brought me an additional blanket. I had collapsed on the toilet floor at my office earlier that day. It was my period. It was always my period. When I was younger and brought up the sharp pain that came every month, all the women in my family said this is how it is to be a woman, or stop complaining, it is normal. So I just learned to swallow and hide it. The OBGYN told me I had endometriosis, cysts on my ovaries, and fibroids. She asked if sex was painful. I nodded quietly, because I did not have a language for that pain. It was not a noble pain like birthing. You don't speak about this pain, grace it with expression and words. Admitting this pain makes you a lesser woman. And I had learned, this is how it is to be a woman. Years later, I travel across India visiting homes and meeting with women from FGMC practicing communities for a research project. The women I spoke with would always ask me, why are you interested in FGMC if you have not gone through it yourself? At the time, I did not have the language to say why. I did not allow myself to examine why FGMC in particular affects me so deeply, so personally. Now I see. It is because of the weight of carrying an unspoken pain, the silencing, being dismissed, minimized, and judged. I can relate to so much of it. But unlike with endometriosis, with FGMC, I can do something to stop it. Because this should not be how it is to be a woman.
All right. I love that final image of the birds taking off. It feels like a hopeful note to end on. So I'm going to turn it over to Orchid, who's going to lead us into the next phase of our screening today.
All right. Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you everyone again for being here. This third part of our time together is a chance to debrief together, and particularly to hear from two of the storytellers from this cohort of stories that you just got to watch. So definitely you can see on the slide that you can submit questions through the Q&A chat box that is at the bottom of, it's probably at the bottom, for some of you it might be at the top, but your Zoom menu of options at the bottom, there's a Q&A option. We're going to try to keep track of the chat box and the Q&A option. But this is something that is so powerful about digital storytelling as a tool, is that it's a way that that survivors can connect with each other, can take their experience and do something with it in a really holistic multimedia kind of way, and then be able to share it with a broader audience without needing to be there in person, without needing to be alone on a stage, in a way that mirrors some of the other opportunities that the gender-based violence field has used to empower survivors and bring stories to our community audiences. But this is a way that we get to support storytellers, learn from storytellers, and hear from them about the process, about what this was like to be with others and to work together on this one of many tools for healing and sharing. So I'm just going to get us started with a couple of questions for our two storytellers who are joining us today, Catherine and Farrah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for every piece of this, for being in this cohort of storytellers, for being part of Sahiyo, and for being here and sharing more with people directly. So I'm just going to get us started and ask if you can share with us just what this storytelling process was like for you, now that you have officially been here to see your story screened in a general screening for people to learn from. What was it like for you?
The storytelling process for me, well, thanks for having me, first of all, was surprisingly difficult. While this happened to me a very long time ago, I can't help but relive the emotions from that time. You almost have to bury it very deep to just kind of function and move on with your life. And that's what you do. And to unearth it again was more painful than I thought it would be after all that time. When I would work on my story in between the sessions, it would start to feel really heavy, and even physical heaviness in my chest that I would feel. I would have to take breaks quite frequently. There were tears too, for sure. But being a part of the cohort made it very doable. It made me get through it. I was always looking forward to the next session and leaning on others in the group, and the facilitators were very encouraging, very gentle, offered a lot of support, and helped made the entire process much smoother.
Thank you, Farrah.
Yeah.
Kate?
Yeah, just want to say again, thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be on such an amazing panel today with Farrah. I will say, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm also the programs coordinator at Sahiyo, and I've been on the Sahiyo team for a little under 3 years now. So I've actually been involved in the planning process for the Voices Project in some capacity for the past 3 years. However, last year was the first year that I decided I would be interested in taking part. And so I think for me, it really stemmed from wanting to reflect on my 3 years working at Sahiyo as an advocate empowering communities to abandon FGMC. And again, to really reflect on how much this work has really changed and empowered me as someone who is not a survivor of FGMC. And so I definitely had kind of questions going into it about what my role was as someone who's not a survivor, and wanted to make sure that I was going into it in a way that was not taking space away from survivors or speaking over survivors. I do, however, believe that there is definitely a space for everyone in this movement, and also believe that those of us who are not survivors have a lot to gain from really sitting and actively listening to survivors, and that a lot of the larger issues that survivors are talking about, the questions they're raising about bodily autonomy, gender, shame, and sex, and patriarchal control really have an application and relevance to everyone. And so I think going into it, that was really the message that I wanted to share and encourage more people to become involved in this movement. And I really just think, doing the storytelling process in that community was really impactful. And just being able to share those experiences with others was, I think, one of the most impactful parts, and definitely helped kind of get me through the tougher parts of storytelling.
Thank you both. I'm going to put two questions together that are from our Q&A. So one is sort of about your state of mind going into the decision of yes, I'm going to make a story, and the other is really about right now, just what it's like for you to be here today at this moment after your story has been shared. So first, the first question from Leanne is, did you have fear about sharing your story before this? And if so, what helped you move past that fear to actually choose to make your story and to share your story? And I guess, related to that, is it still scary sometimes, or has that changed and you feel like it's more empowering?
I'll go first.
Okay.
It's a great question. I had been wanting to share my story for a very long time. I actually have been sharing my story since I was 19. I'm in my late 30s now. But I was often doing it anonymously. This was the first time that I wanted to attach my name to my work. And being a part, doing it in this way, on this platform, gave me the confidence, I think, to do that. Was I afraid to share my story? Definitely it was nerve-wracking. I know now that if somebody were to Google me, this might be the first thing that comes up. And that was a decision that I did not make lightly. I thought about that. And that was really hard. I still get nervous about it. But I've kind of moved past that. I feel that this was more important than those other things. I think another thing that helped me kind of attach my name to my work and to my story was becoming a mom. I think about my kids and the world they live in and the future, and that really gave me the courage and confidence to speak out. Some of those other things that made me nervous before kind of fell away. And that's kind of where I'm at. To see my story now kind of live, publicly being shared, it feels good. I feel lighter. I feel like I've been carrying this alone for a very long time. And I'm just kind of ready for my story and my experience to serve a bigger purpose. But yeah, I still get nervous about backlash, what family members and community members may think when they see this as it makes its rounds. Definitely, I've been thinking about that. I was able to get support from the cohort in the event that does happen. What to say, how to handle it, prepared my spouse for, things that might be said to him. So these are all things that I had to think about and still think about. Did I answer the whole question? Let me know if I got it all.
You did, and you really did. Thank you. I feel like the courage behind this decision making and this process and preparing yourself and preparing your family and talking about it with the other cohort members, it's just amazing, amazing courage. It's so inspiring. Anyway, Kate, how about you? Nervousness or fear going into it, and experience right now having shared it?
Yeah. So I think for me, when I first started, I wasn't experiencing that much nervousness because I went into it kind of with the initial mindset that I would only really talk about kind of my role as an ally and an activist in that space. And so one of the things that kind of transformed for me throughout the storytelling process was trying to be a bit more vulnerable about my experience with vaginismus, which is a medical condition of the pelvic floor that causes the tightening of the vaginal walls, makes things like sex, tampon insertion really painful. And so I had originally not gone into it thinking that I would share that story. But, you know, as I have moved throughout my life and moved through working in the movement to End FGM, I've really been able to learn a lot from survivors and gain a lot of confidence. And as I share a little bit in my story, a lot of the feelings of shame and pain that I felt were validated a lot in this movement. And that was a story I wanted to tell. But in transitioning to telling more of that story and being a bit more vulnerable, some of those fears for me came up a little bit, particularly around, I think a little bit similar to what Farrah was saying, you know, if people look up my name, the first thing that's going to be there is me talking about sex and shame and what does that look like for employers? What does that look like for my family members? And I certainly come from a family where, you know, you are not supposed to talk about sex. You're not supposed to talk about pain. And so I certainly do not have the experience of undergoing FGMC, but there's definitely stigma around talking about sex and shame from my family. And so that was something that I was definitely really nervous about coming out and having my name really publicly attached to it. And I think now, just in kind of going through that experience with community and watching the video now, I think I definitely get some of those like little butterflies of fear that come through. But I think it's really, again, the community and the growth that I've been able to see in myself and really feeling confidence in, yes, that's my story. That's something I experienced, you know, and feeling more ownership over the story helps for me, at least with some of those fears that, you know, I think are inevitably going to pop up for anyone.
Thank you. You know, I feel like there's you both ended up connecting to another question that we have, which is about I guess as a little backdrop, it's like, you know, digital storytelling. I first met Amy in 2002 in a digital storytelling workshop, and I still remember those like early years of sitting with this reality that our goal is for story making and story sharing to be good for the survivor, for connecting with others, for healing to be something that can branch out of the isolation of the violence. The violence usually happens in isolation, the immediate healing often in isolation, the survival. But deeper, full, future-facing healing is so much better when it's together, when the isolation is broken. And so the idea of like you know, going through the storytelling is hard. Writing your story, recording your story, putting the images together, thinking about the backlash, anticipating the butterflies, the Google searches, like both of you have talked about. That's part of going into it. And then you're not just, neither of you is kind of going through that just for yourself, just to come out with the story for yourself, to have done it for your own healing, but clearly you're here and you're sharing the stories for a broader purpose. So for individual and for this bigger next rings out of influence. And I'm wondering if you could share with us kind of how you think about using your story or the hopes you have for the impact of your story now that you have made it and shared it.
I think I'm just happy to add to a body of work that I hope will continue to grow. I've already shared publicly with kind of my network and friends, and I received a ton of encouraging messages already from people who didn't know this part of me and weren't expecting it. I think what was so shocking for my network was that I'm born and raised in the US, and they just couldn't get over the fact that it happened to me, and in the US, that it's, a problem that is happening here. I think raising awareness about that was really validating for me. And I think like being in this format makes it easier to share and tell the story. But I think like what really is like the big thing for me is I want to take the shock and the shame that I used to feel. I want that to go away. I really want that piece to go away. And I think just making this and having it out there will help do that once people realize that this is a social norm, like this happens everywhere, not just in Africa, and then make it more real for me. I think someone asked the question earlier, what would be a more appropriate response? Because, everyone's initial reaction in my circle who I tell is just shock. And I think that's what I'm trying to get at, because that shock really confirms my otherness, kind of like I said in the video. Like it just exacerbates that feeling of isolation and being alone. Like this only happened to you. This only happens to a small group of people. It doesn't. And the last thing I'll add is I hope to show this to my really young children one day and hope that they can understand me a little bit better.
Both of you are so articulate. It's like mind-boggling. Like some of us talk a mess when we're talking, but then when we make our digital story, it's really edited and clear. Both of you are your answers are, I'm grateful for them. Thank you. Kate, do you want to add anything on this?
Yeah. So I think part of my goals and my hopes for my story are kind of twofold. One is that, as I mentioned in my story, so the first time I ever heard anyone really talk publicly about shame and sex, say the word vaginismus out loud, was at a webinar talking about FGMC for survivors of FGMC. And so I think for me, there's a personal motivation there. And, I want to be that person for someone. I want to be able to say, hey, this is something you might be experiencing. It's not shameful to talk about. The pain you're experiencing I know it hurts, but you're not alone in that. So that's kind of a personal motivation there. And then also really wanting to encourage more folks who are not survivors, again, to recognize that they have a place in this movement, and to recognize that a lot of times, at least in the United States, FGMC tends to be seen as a siloed issue, an issue, again, like Farrah was mentioned, that only impacts certain communities, but really there's so much that the conversation around FGMC in the United States and around the world can tell us about these larger systems of violence and patriarchy, and that when we are all at the table, when we're all listening, that's an important part of ending FGMC and an important part of ending all forms of gender-based violence. So I hope that if my video is able to kind of impact anyone, it would be recognizing the need to come to the table, the need to talk about FGMC, and the need to really listen and uplift the voices of survivors as well.
That kind of goes right into this other question in our Q&A, which is, I'm wondering if both of you want to share some thoughts about how you see cutting as a practice connected to gender inequality, or you just said patriarchy, whatever language, if we use gender inequality, male dominance, patriarchy, how do you see a connection there?
In questioning the practice in my own family and own community, I was given many reasons, some that were at odds with one another, one of the first ones I got was cleanliness. But that really was just a code for, you know, with the root being like patriarchy, just telling me that the girls were cut so that they wouldn't be promiscuous. That the possibility of that would be, you know, not there. Once I kind of understood what they were getting at, you know, as I got older, high school, college, it's just like really started connecting with the whole gender-based violence movement for me. I'm like, I am part of this. Like I'm a victim. I am a survivor of this. That was really hard to grapple with, because I didn't think about it before. What I was told as a child was, we're just gonna, you know, like take a little piece of skin. You didn't know it was, you were gonna take my sexual organ away from me, like without my consent. So just all of that, you know, is kind of what triggered a downward spiral for me during the time I talked about in my video.
Thank you, Farrah. Kate, do you want to say anything about how you see these connections?
Yeah. And I think, again, being part of Sahiyo has really, really opened my eyes to this. And I agree with a lot of what Maria was saying earlier, that in many communities, FGMC is a social norm, which means that there are lots of justifications for it and they change over time. But really the way I think I view it and the way I am able to connect in certain ways to the issue of FGMC is it's part of a larger web of socially sanctioned violence, particularly against people assigned female at birth. And that can include FGMC, also includes things like child marriage, childhood sexual assault, really just a large web of violences that are socially acceptable and considered part of a ways in which you know, we're able to, you know, disadvantage those who are assigned female at birth. And so for me, I think that is how I have been able to view FGMC. And as someone who is not part of a practicing community, I think it's really also important for me to recognize the ways in which my own community has some of these social norms. I'm in Massachusetts, and I think it was only last year that we made child marriage illegal here, which meant that girls in our state as young as 11 were getting married. Certainly in, you know, my own family and community, we have issues with sexual assault and sexual abuse. And so I think when we really understand that that FGMC is one part of a really large web of things that happen to women and girls, we understand the need for everyone to come to the table and to not other the issue and to really recognize it as something that is, you know, for us as a global community to contend with the way we treat women and girls, and look at FGMC as part of that.
Thank you. I think, you know, if I can add one thing, just as a, you know, as an organization, Asian Women's Shelter as an organization that is dedicated like in the bone marrow to addressing and ending gender-based violence. I think it's like there are just so many strategies and tools that people have used around the world across time to control and limit, sorry, there's some teenagers, to control and limit the independence, the self-ownership of life for people assigned female at birth. And that you know, that limiting, that control, that causing of trauma, the legitimizing of trauma, the justification of violence, the minimizing of pain, and then the passing on of that pain, that is, all kinds of people uphold those forms of violence, not just people of one gender, that all kinds of people are activated oftentimes women themselves activated to continue the practice. And also all kinds of people are against it. And I really feel that with FGMC, with domestic violence, with sexual assault, with female feticide, with so many examples of gender-based violence. I feel like people of all kinds are upholding it and trying to justify it for the next generation, and all kinds of people in each of our communities, even if they haven't been discovered, even if they haven't like had the chance to be loud about it yet, that every community has the people who are saying no, no more, like not one generation more, not one sibling group more will keep, passing this down. I wonder, I know I'm trying to scan all of our places for comments and questions from folks. There's a question that I can pose to the two of you, and also, open up for others. This question about how to have more connection, how to have more resources and ways for survivors, for advocates, for allies to be able to create a bigger and bigger community together. So this question specifically is, how do we extend this to Liberia? How do we extend this so that more survivors in different places have this opportunity to go through the same processes of personal decision making, personal story creating, and self-determined story sharing on this topic? It's a big giant question, and I welcome, if it's okay, I welcome, Amy and Maria, if you want to jump in on this question, please go ahead.
I'm happy to jump in. So I think that's a great question. And I know that we've had participants that have asked us before about how to bring it to their country of origin, or to bring it to their location, if there's ways to collaborate on it. And I think storytelling can take so many different forms. And when Sahiyo started, it's interesting, the 5 co-founders, 4 of us were connected to writing and storytelling in some way. There were 2 that were documentarians. I'm a writer myself, another person who was a journalist, and then we had public health and social work backgrounds. And so it kind of just naturally came to be that we were really thinking and drawn to the fact that we recognized the community that we were raised in. 4 of us were connected to a South Asian community that Farrah is also connected with too. And so we were recognizing there was a lot of silence in that community. And one way to break that is that storytelling. So how do we do that? And this was at the beginning when we did not have really any programming. We were just brainstorming and volunteering. And one simple thing we did was start a blog. Honestly, it was just a shared space where we're like, maybe the first step is having stories. And I remember in December 2015, we started that blog and we had maybe like 10 views on it. And now when we look at our website, we get over 100,000 views, 100,000 users a year plus. And so it's kind of amazing to me to see how that just spread and happened. And it was a simple start with creating this idea of a shared digital space where people could share their stories. And as we were sharing stories, other people were reaching out to us to also tell us their stories and talking about it happening in their communities as well, or that they've never had a space to talk about this. And then we started branching out into other ways of telling stories. So holding just small in-person events, maybe it's for a couple of hours if you can have a gathering, and we always talk about like, what would we like in a safe space when we're doing this? And that could be having people we trust. It doesn't even have to, it could be just talking to one other person you trust and sharing your story with that person. And so thinking about that, we started having these smaller spaces where people could come together. We started the Digital Storytelling Project in collaboration with the wonderful organizations that are here today too. And we started recognizing that research was another way to tell stories, but it's just a different format. And there's so many different ways to tell stories. And even we're actually human beings are natural storytellers. We share experiences with people and with one another all the time. And so it's just, but when it comes to FGC, there are many communities where you're taught not to talk about this. So it's breaking that silence and thinking about how can you even share about this? Maybe storytelling is writing in a journal for yourself, too. So I know that personally, we're all committed to trying to expand this specific Voices to End FGMC project. But I do think there are other ways to think about how you can use the stories or tell your own stories. You're always welcome to use the stories from the Voices Project. They're on our website. They're on YouTube channels for StoryCenter and Sahiyo. And if that's a helpful prompt, we found that's actually a helpful tool. Sometimes using an existing story and sending it to somebody, maybe they won't respond, but maybe they will. So just really thinking about all those different ways that you can engage dialogue and community building, I think is really helpful. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Thank you, Maria. I just have one last question. One last question for Kate and Farrah, which is really just I just want to ask you if there's something that we haven't touched on yet that you would like to share to help us know you and your process and honor this amazing. I just feel like words aren't enough. It's part of why digital storytelling is so great, because the power of the tone of your voice is being perfect to tell your stories, the sound, the images that you create. It makes a whole experience for those of us who are lucky enough to be able to watch the stories. And I feel so positive that real trailblazing is what you're doing. Real trailblazing is like going through all of what you have gone through to get to this point, to make this decision, this public decision to really go against the tide of silence. The tide of silence is so strong, and I'm so impressed. I'm endlessly impressed with what you're doing. So I just want you to have open floor just to share anything lingering on your mind that that you want to share with us before we wrap up, about you as a storyteller, you as a person, you as a trailblazer. Oh, Farrah, you're muted.
Thank you. Thanks, Orchid. I think what I wanted to convey with my story, instead of kind of focusing on the actual incident, which we've heard, horrible, traumatic, I wanted to illustrate that it permeates and persists. It's not really over when the act is over. I think you heard in Mona's story, she's 50 years old and it's still really difficult for her. It seeps into other parts of your life. It arises when you least expect it. I think for me, focusing on the mental health crisis that I had in college, that was really hard to relive, because that was a really important time that I can't get back. A lot of decisions were made during that time that I can't reverse. Some of those, years are kind of lost. I do have a lot of regret about that time. I was a really angry person. I was really difficult to be around, and different groups of people, saw those sides of me. And, I really regret some of the decisions I made during that time. The other thing I want to share is that, going back to coming out publicly and attaching my name to the story, it finally feels to me, after, almost like 2 decades of doing this kind of work and activism, like 2 halves becoming whole. I was like 2 different people, but now I can be one person and live a more authentic life, which I feel like, everyone is striving for. I wouldn't say that I'm there yet, but it's a start. Like when I feel lighter, like that's a lot. I don't think that I would have had the same feeling had I done it anonymously. I just feel like it's more impactful to have a name and a face to the story. And not that I, disrespect or discredit to those who posted anonymously. I mean, I did so for many years myself. It's just the timing felt right for me. And that's kind of when I decided to do it. And yeah, I'm still a work in progress. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Kate?
Yeah, and just kind of quickly hop in here at the end. So I think for me, and I don't know if I mentioned it before, so when I started at Sahiyo, I was 19. In a couple months, I'll be turning 22. And I've just really valued the opportunity to kind of come of age within this movement, and really surrounded by a lot of brave survivors and activists who, in my view, have in essence kind of raised me in a way, and have allowed me, the space to see my own self in more clarity, and who have, been really continual in holding me in a lot of light and a lot of love. So just, I think if there was any motivation in me sharing this story, it was really a kind of love for everyone that I have had the privilege to grow up around. And I think, again, just reflecting on all of the amazing stories that I've heard today and been hearing for 3 years, I think the last message that I find just valuable to share is really, I think, what Maria was mentioning about the value of storytelling, and that when any of us are able to share our stories, even when they're ones of pain and trauma and sadness, when we're able to share those stories, and when we're able to see one another and hold one another in that community, in that light, even in that brief moment, the world becomes a better place and a safer place. So just thank you to everyone I've, been around, and this thank you to the entire cohort, and Sahiyo for giving me this opportunity.
Well, I think if everybody could just shower you both with gratitude and love and more gratitude and more love, we would. That's what I feel like I can say on behalf of all of us. Thank you for answering these questions and being here. I'm so inspired by both of you, and I'm so grateful that we got to hear from you, both from your story and from your live answers. So I'm gonna pass this over to Maria to close us out.
Thank you so much, Orchid. Thank you, Farrah and Kate. That was just such a wonderful, rich discussion. And I love hearing from the storytellers in the workshop too, and just really recognizing what your process was like and what your aims and hopes are. So thank you both. So I know we only have 1 minute left. If we could just get the PowerPoint slide up, we really want to tell you all, thank you for attending, and remind you all that these stories from our latest cohort and all the other Voices stories are on Sahiyo and StoryCenter's YouTube channels, but they're also on our Voices to End FGM website. So please visit. And if we could just go to the next slide, I want to make sure that all of you have our contact information if you'd like to contact any of us at Asian Women's Shelter, at StoryCenter, or at Sahiyo. So thank you again. I don't know, Amy, if you wanted to quickly say anything, you're welcome to. But all right. So thank you all so much for coming and attending. Have a good rest of your day or evening. Oh, I forgot there is a poll. If you're still on, if you can quickly take the poll, that would be wonderful too. But have Have a great rest of your time wherever you're located in the world.
Bye, everyone, as you're signing off. Amazing job, you guys. Farrah and Kate, you're freaking superstars.